Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, staring at the massive ships that had appeared on their screens. The alien vessels were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They looked like giant crystals floating in space, each one the size of a small city. Light moved through them like liquid fire, creating patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "How many ships are there?" Jake asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez checked her instruments twice before answering. 57 confirmed, Captain. Maybe more hiding behind the larger ones. They're all bigger than anything we've ever built. Jake nodded slowly. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with an alien species called the Zephyrians. The meeting had been brief and formal. The aliens had told Earth's leaders that they would return to judge whether humans deserved to join the galactic community. Now they were here. Dr. Lisa Bennett, the ship's scientist who studied alien life, walked onto the bridge. She had been working day and night to learn everything possible about the Zephyrians. "Captain, I've been analyzing their previous transmissions. Their society is very old and very structured. They believe in hierarchy and order above all else." "What does that mean for us?" Jake asked. "It means they probably see us as children who need to prove ourselves," Lisa replied. "And if we can't prove ourselves, they might decide we're too dangerous to be left alone." Communications Officer Ryan Torres looked up from his station. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the lead ship. It's the same signal pattern as before." "Put it on screen," Jake ordered. The main display flickered and then showed a figure that made everyone on the bridge hold their breath. The alien was tall and seemed to be made of living crystal. Light moved through her body in slow waves, and her eyes looked like captured stars. When she moved, it was with the grace of someone who had lived for thousands of years. "I am Queen Valeth of the Zephyrian Empire," the alien said. Her voice was like music played on crystal bells. "I have come to judge the species called humans. You will face the trials of ascension that all young races must complete." Jake stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I am Captain Jake Morrison." "We are honored by your presence," the Queen studied him with those star-bright eyes. "Honor is earned, human. Your species has spread to several star systems in a very short time. You have shown both creativity and violence. The trials will determine which nature is stronger in you." Behind the Queen, Jake could see another figure. This one looked like a warrior, with darker crystal formations that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The warrior stepped closer to the Queen. "Your Majesty," the warrior said, "these humans are clearly too primitive and aggressive. Look at their crude metal ships and their simple weapons. They should be brought under our control immediately, for the safety of the galaxy." Queen Valeth raised a hand for silence. "Commander Zalthek, the trials exist for a reason. They have been used to judge species for over 10,000 years. We will not abandon them now." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. 10,000 years. How many species had faced these trials? How many had passed? What do these trials involve? Jake asked. The Queen's expression didn't change. "There are 3 trials. The first is a test of strength. You must defeat a battle group of our ships in combat. The second is a test of wisdom. You must solve a puzzle that has challenged civilizations for millennia. The third is a test of progress. You must create something that surpasses our technology." Amy Rodriguez whispered to Jake, "Captain, their weapons could cut through our hulls like paper, and their technology is centuries ahead of ours." Jake nodded but kept his eyes on the Queen. "And if we fail these trials? Then your species will be placed under our guidance until you mature enough to govern yourselves," Queen Valeth replied. "This is for the good of all species in the galaxy." Commander Zalthek stepped forward again. "Your Majesty, why waste time with trials? These humans are violent and unpredictable. In the short time since they developed space travel, they have already had conflicts with each other. They are not ready to join civilized society." The Queen turned to look at her commander. "Patience, Zalthek. Many species have shown violence in their youth. The trials will reveal their true nature." Jake watched this exchange carefully. He noticed something interesting about the way the Queen and her commander interacted. Zalthek spoke to her with respect, but there was something cold about it. He spoke to her like she was a position rather than a person. "When do these trials begin?" Jake asked. "You have 7 of your days to prepare," Queen Valeth answered. "Use this time wisely. The trials have been failed by many species. Success is not guaranteed." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Jake looked around at his crew. Chief Engineer Ben Carter had joined them during the conversation, and his face was pale. "Captain," Ben said, "I've been analyzing their ships while they were talking. The energy readings are off the charts. Their smallest ship could probably destroy our entire fleet. Ryan Torres shook his head. This is impossible. How can we defeat them in combat when they're so much more advanced? Lisa Bennett had been quiet during the exchange, but now she spoke up. Captain, I noticed something during that conversation. Did you see how the commander talked to the Queen? What do you mean? Jake asked. He was respectful, but it was formal, cold. And did you notice how the Queen responded? She seemed almost isolated even with all those advisors around her. Jake thought about this. What are you suggesting? I'm not sure yet, Lisa said. But I think there might be more to this situation than just the trials. The Queen has been ruling for who knows how long, surrounded by people who treat her like a symbol rather than a person. Amy Rodriguez pulled up tactical displays on her screen. Captain, even if we had a year to prepare, I don't see how we could pass these trials. Their technology is just too advanced. Jake stared at the screen where the alien fleet waited. 57 massive ships, each one capable of destroying everything humanity had built in space. And they wanted humans to prove themselves worthy of joining galactic civilization. Ryan, open a channel to Earth Command, Jake ordered. They need to know what we're facing. Yes, sir, Ryan replied. Jake continued to study the alien ships. Something about this whole situation felt wrong to him. The trials seemed designed to be impossible for a young species to pass, and that commander, Zal Thek, had seemed almost eager to see humans fail. Lisa, Jake said, I want you to study everything we know about Zephyrian culture, not just their technology or their military, but how they live, how they interact with each other. What are you thinking, Captain? Lisa asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. I'm thinking that maybe we're approaching this all wrong. Maybe the answer isn't to beat them at their own game. Amy Rodriguez looked confused. But Captain, these are the trials. We have to at least try to pass them, do we? Jake asked. Says who, them? The bridge fell silent as everyone considered this. In 7 days, humanity would face trials that could determine their future among the stars. But Jake Morrison was beginning to think that the real test might be something completely different. 3 days had passed since Queen Valeth had given humanity the trials. Jake Morrison sat in his ready room, reading reports from Earth about humanity's preparations. Every military base was working around the clock to find some way to win an impossible fight. Dr. Lisa Bennett knocked on his door and entered when he called for her to come in. She carried a data tablet and looked tired from days of research. I've been studying everything we know about the Zephyrians, she said, sitting down across from Jake. What I found is interesting. Tell me, Jake replied. Their society is built around something they call perfect order, Lisa explained. Everyone has a specific role and nobody questions it. The Queen has ruled for over 3,000 years, and in all that time, the structure of their government hasn't changed at all. Jake leaned forward. What about their trials? How many species have taken them? Lisa's expression grew serious. That's the scary part. In the last 1,000 years, 47 species have taken the trials. Only 12 passed all 3 tests, and the others? They're all under Zephyrian control now. They're not slaves exactly, but they have no independence. The Zephyrians make all their important decisions for them. Jake felt a cold weight in his stomach. So if we fail, humanity becomes a puppet state. That's what it looks like, Lisa confirmed. But Captain, there's something else. I've been analyzing the recordings of Queen Valeth's communications. There's something strange about the way she acts. What do you mean? Lisa pulled up a video on her tablet. Watch her eyes when Commander Zaltek speaks to her, and notice how none of her advisors ever look directly at her unless she's giving them an order. Jake watched the recording carefully. Lisa was right. The Queen seemed isolated even when surrounded by her people. She was treated with respect, but it was the kind of respect people showed to a statue in a museum. She's lonely, Jake realized. I think so too, Lisa agreed. Imagine ruling for 3,000 years with nobody ever treating you like a normal person. Everyone around her sees her as Queen Valeth the ruler, not Valeth the individual. Before Jake could respond, Ryan Torres's voice came over the communication system. Captain Morrison, to the bridge, please. Urgent message from the Zephyrian fleet. Jake and Lisa hurried to the bridge. On the main screen, Commander Zalthek appeared. His dark crystal form seemed to absorb the light around him, making him look menacing. Human Captain, Zalthek said. Queen Valeth has decided to explain the trials in detail. so there can be no confusion about what is required. The image changed to show Queen Valeth in what looked like a throne room made of crystal. The walls seemed alive with moving light, and the ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into darkness. "Captain Morrison," the Queen began, "the first trial will test your species' ability to defend itself. You will face a battle group of 5 Zephyrian warships. Your entire fleet may participate, but you must achieve complete victory. Any Zephyrian ship that remains functional means you have failed." Amy Rodriguez quickly calculated the odds. "Captain, they're giving us our entire fleet against 5 of their ships. But their 5 ships probably have more firepower than everything we've got combined." Queen Valeth continued. "The second trial will test your wisdom. You will be presented with the Puzzle of Eternity, which has been used to test species for 5,000 years. It must be solved within 1 day. The third trial," the Queen said, "will test your advancement. You must create a piece of technology that we have never seen before and that surpasses something we already possess. You will have access to materials, but the design must be entirely your own." The image switched back to Commander Zalthek. "These trials have been carefully designed over millennia. They test everything that matters in a civilized species: strength, wisdom, and progress. Most species fail at least 1 trial. What happens to species that fail only 1 or 2 trials?" Jake asked. Zalthek's crystalline features seemed to form something like a smile. "They are still placed under our guidance, but they are given more freedom than species that fail all 3. However, they are never considered equals." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge quiet except for the humming of the ship's systems. Ben Carter was the first to speak. "Captain, I've been running simulations of our weapons against their ships. Even if we used every missile and energy weapon in our fleet perfectly, we might damage one of their ships. Maybe." "And the technology trial?" Jake asked. "That's even worse," Ben replied. "They've had thousands of years to develop technology. What could we possibly create that they haven't seen before?" Amy Rodriguez pulled up tactical displays. "The only advantage we might have is that we're unpredictable. They're used to species that think like they do. But even that won't be enough to win a straight fight." Jake walked over to the main screen, which now showed the Zephyrian fleet in the distance. Their ships were beautiful in a way that human ships could never be. They looked like art pieces floating in space. "Lisa," Jake said, "tell me more about Queen Valeth herself. Not her position, but her as a person." Lisa consulted her notes. "She's ruled for 3,000 years, but before that she was a military commander. She conquered 17 star systems before becoming queen. But here's the interesting part. After she became queen, the Zephyrian expansion stopped." "Stopped completely?" "Yes. For 3,000 years they've maintained their territory but haven't expanded. They just enforce their trial system and manage the species under their control." Ryan Torres looked up from his station. "Captain, I'm receiving reports from Earth. Admiral Parker wants to know our battle plan for the trials." Jake was quiet for a long moment. His crew waited for orders, but Jake was thinking about something entirely different. He was thinking about loneliness and isolation. He was thinking about a queen who had ruled for 3,000 years without anyone treating her like a real person. "Captain?" Amy asked. "What are your orders?" Jake turned to face his crew. "I'm going to do something that might get us all in trouble with Earth Command." "What do you mean?" Ben asked. "I'm going to refuse the trials," Jake said. The bridge erupted in shocked voices. Amy Rodriguez stood up from her station. "Captain, if we refuse, they'll just take control of humanity immediately. We have to at least try." "No," Jake said firmly. "Think about it. These trials are designed to fail. They're not really tests, they're justifications. The Zephyrians have already decided that young species need their guidance. The trials are just a way to make it seem fair." Lisa Bennett's eyes widened as she understood. "You want to change the game completely?" "Exactly," Jake said. "Instead of playing by their rules, we're going to do something no species has ever done before." "What's that?" Ryan asked. Jake looked at the image of the Zephyrian fleet. "We're going to treat Queen Valeth like a person instead of a ruler. We're going to offer her something her own people can't give her." Amy Rodriguez shook her head. "Captain, that's incredibly risky. If you're wrong about this, humanity could pay the price." "If I'm right," Jake replied, "we might change everything. Not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy." Ben Carter looked worried. "What exactly are you planning to do?" Jake smiled for the first time in days. "I'm going to ask Queen Valeth if she wants to have a conversation. Not a formal diplomatic meeting, not a military negotiation, Just two people talking. And you think that will work? Amy asked. I think, Jake said, that Queen Valeth has been waiting 3,000 years for someone to see her as more than just a title. And I think that might be worth more to her than all the technology and military power in the galaxy. Lisa Bennett smiled slowly. Captain, that might be the most human thing anyone has ever suggested. And that might be exactly why it could work. The day of the trials arrived, and Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, knowing that what he was about to do had never been attempted in galactic history. His crew looked nervous but determined. They had spent the last 4 days preparing for this moment. Captain, Ryan Torres said, we're receiving the standard trial commencement signal from the Zephyrian flagship. Open a channel to Queen Valeth, Jake ordered. Full broadcast to their entire fleet. The main screen showed Queen Valeth on her throne surrounded by her advisors. Commander Zalthek stood at her right side, and several other Zephyrian officials flanked her. The throne room looked cold and formal despite its crystal beauty. Captain Morrison, Queen Valeth said, you will now begin the first trial. Deploy your fleet and prepare for combat. Jake took a deep breath. Your Majesty, humanity formally declines to participate in the trials. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every Zephyrian on the screen looked shocked. Commander Zalthek stepped forward, his dark crystal form seeming to grow larger with anger. This is unacceptable, Zalthek shouted. No species has ever refused the trials. This is an insult to Queen Valeth and to our entire civilization. But Jake kept his eyes on the Queen. Her expression had changed from formal authority to something that looked almost like curiosity. Your Majesty, Jake continued, we refuse the trials because we believe they are designed to fail. We don't think they're really tests at all. We think they're excuses. The throne room erupted in angry voices from the Zephyrian advisors. Commander Zalthek's voice rose above the others. Your Majesty, this human's arrogance proves that his species is too dangerous to be allowed freedom. We should take control of their worlds immediately. Queen Valeth raised her hand and the throne room fell silent instantly. She studied Jake with those star-bright eyes for a long moment. Captain Morrison, she said slowly, explain your reasoning. Jake felt his heart beating fast, but he kept his voice steady. Your Majesty, in the last 1,000 years, only 12 out of 47 species have passed your trials. Those aren't the numbers you'd expect if the trials were fair tests. Those are the numbers you'd expect if the trials were designed to justify a decision you've already made. Commander Zalthek stepped closer to the throne. Your Majesty, this human's accusations are— Silence, Queen Valeth said without looking away from Jake. Continue, Captain. We believe that young species need guidance, Jake said. But we also believe that guidance should come from understanding, not from conquest. We don't want to prove our worth through violence or competition. We want to prove it through cooperation and friendship. The Queen leaned forward slightly. And how do you propose to do that? Jake's crew watched nervously as he prepared to make the most important request in human history. Your Majesty, I request a private meeting, not a formal diplomatic session, not a military negotiation, just two people having a conversation. The shocked silence in the Zephyrian throne room was so complete that Jake could hear the humming of his own ship's systems. Commander Zalthek looked like he had been struck by lightning. This is madness. Zalthek finally exploded. A human requesting a private audience with Queen Valeth? The arrogance is beyond belief. But Queen Valeth continued to stare at Jake. For the first time in their communications, she looked genuinely surprised. You want to talk? She said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Your Majesty. Just talk. Not about treaties or territory or trials. About whatever you want to talk about. Dr. Lisa Bennett watched the Queen's face carefully. She could see something changing in those crystal features, something that looked almost like wonder. Your Majesty, Commander Zalthek said urgently, this is clearly a trap. This human is trying to get close to you to attempt some kind of attack or assassination. Queen Valeth finally looked away from Jake to regard her commander. Zesalek, this human's ship is surrounded by our entire fleet. What possible threat could he pose? Your Majesty, it's not about physical threat. It's about propriety, about order. The trials exist for a reason. They maintain the structure that has kept peace in the galaxy for millennia. Jake watched this exchange with interest. He could see the conflict on Queen Valeth's face. Part of her seemed interested in his proposal, but another part was bound by thousands of years of tradition. Your Majesty, Jake said quietly, when was the last time someone asked you what you wanted to do, instead of what you should do. The question hit like a physical blow. Queen Valeth's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked not like an immortal ruler, but like someone who had just been offered something precious and unexpected. Commander Zalthek moved closer to the throne. Your Majesty, please. The trials have worked for 10,000 years. They have brought order to the galaxy. We cannot abandon them now because one arrogant human makes unreasonable requests. Queen Valeth was quiet for a long time. The entire bridge of the horizon waited. The Zephyrian throne room waited. Across space, Jake knew that Earth was watching and waiting too. Finally, Queen Valeth spoke. Commander Zalthek, you are correct that the trials have maintained order, but this human raises an interesting point about their effectiveness. Your Majesty, Zalthek began. I have decided, Queen Valeth said, cutting him off. I will meet with Captain Morrison, alone. The reaction from the Zephyrian advisors was immediate and loud. They all spoke at once, expressing shock and concern. Commander Zalthek's voice rose above the others. Your Majesty, this is unprecedented. Dangerous. What if the human attempts to harm you? Queen Valeth stood from her throne, and the arguing stopped immediately. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of 3,000 years of rule. I am Queen Valeth. I have conquered star systems and ruled an empire spanning dozens of worlds. I believe I can handle a conversation with one human. She turned to look directly at Jake through the screen. Captain Morrison, you will transport to my flagship in 1 hour. You will come alone and unarmed. We will have your conversation. Jake nodded. Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm honored. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the horizon in stunned silence. Amy Rodriguez was the first to speak. Captain, are you sure about this? You'll be completely alone on an alien ship surrounded by their entire fleet. This could be a trap, Ben Carter added. What if they just want to get you away from our ship? Jake shook his head. It's not a trap. Did you see the Queen's face when I asked about the last time someone asked what she wanted? She looked like I had offered her something she'd forgotten existed. Lisa Bennett smiled. Captain, I think you might have just done something that will change galactic history. Ryan Torres looked worried. What should we do if something goes wrong? If they don't let you come back? Jake considered this. If I don't return within 24 hours, contact Earth and tell them what happened. Tell them that humanity tried a different approach. Tell them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer friendship instead of fighting. Amy Rodriguez checked her tactical display. Captain, their flagship is moving closer. It's beautiful, but it's also the most heavily armed ship I've ever seen. Jake looked at the approaching Zephyrian vessel. It was indeed beautiful, like a cathedral made of crystal and light. But he wasn't thinking about its weapons or its technology. He was thinking about a queen who had ruled for 3,000 years without anyone asking what she wanted. Lisa, Jake said. What do you think I should talk to her about? Lisa smiled. Just be yourself, Captain. Ask her about her life, her interests, her thoughts. Treat her like you would any person you wanted to get to know. And if this doesn't work? Jake asked. Then at least we'll have tried something new, Lisa replied. Something human. Jake nodded and headed for the transport bay. In 1 hour, he would be face to face with an immortal alien queen with nothing but conversation as his weapon. It was, he thought, either the bravest or most foolish thing he had ever done. But as he prepared to transport to the Zephyrian flagship, Jake Morrison felt something he hadn't expected. He felt hopeful. Jake Morrison materialized in a room that took his breath away. The transport beam had brought him to what appeared to be a garden inside the Zephyrian flagship. Crystal trees reached toward a ceiling that showed the stars outside, and streams of light flowed through the air like ribbons. The floor beneath his feet was smooth crystal that seemed warm to the touch. Queen Valeth stood near a fountain of liquid light, but she looked different than she had in the formal throne room. She seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. Without her crown and royal robes, she looked more like a person and less like a symbol. Captain Morrison, she said, and her voice was softer than it had been during their official communications. Welcome to my private sanctuary. Jake looked around in wonder. Your Majesty, this place is incredible. I've never seen anything like it. Please, Queen Valeth said, call me Valeth. We are not in the throne room now. Jake was surprised. Are you sure? I don't want to be disrespectful. Valeth's crystal features formed what might have been a smile. Captain, you just refused our most sacred trials and requested a personal conversation with me. I think we are past worrying about formal protocol. They walked along a path between the crystal trees. Jake noticed that Valeth moved differently here than she had in the throne room. She seemed more relaxed, more natural. "How long have you had this garden?" Jake asked. "I created it about 2,000 years ago," Valeth replied. "I needed a place where I could think without advisors and protocols and the weight of empire." Jake stopped walking. 2,000 years ago? You've been coming here alone for 2,000 years? Valeth paused by one of the crystal trees. Light moved through its branches in slow patterns. "Yes, it is the only place where I am not Queen Valeth. Here, I can just be myself." "What's that like?" Jake asked. "Being yourself, I mean." Valeth turned to look at him, and Jake saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Surprise. "No one has ever asked me that." "Question," she said quietly. They sat on a bench made of crystal that somehow felt comfortable despite its appearance. Jake could hear the sound of the light fountain in the background, and it was surprisingly peaceful. "Tell me about Earth," Valeth said. "Not the military reports or the diplomatic summaries. Tell me what it's really like." Jake smiled. "It's messy. Beautiful but messy. We have thousands of different cultures and languages. People disagree about everything. Sometimes we fight, but mostly we just argue loudly and then figure out how to work together anyway." "That sounds chaotic," Valeth said, but she didn't sound disapproving. "It is chaotic," Jake agreed, "but it's also exciting. There's always something new happening, someone trying a different way of doing things. It keeps life interesting." Valeth was quiet for a moment. "The Zephyrian Empire has not changed in 3,000 years. Everything is ordered, predictable, efficient. Do you like it that way?" Jake asked, again that look of surprise. I don't know. I never thought about whether I liked it. It simply is the way things are." Jake leaned back on the crystal bench. "On Earth we have this saying, life is what happens while you're making other plans. It means that sometimes the best parts of life are the unexpected things." "Unexpected things," Valeth repeated. "In the Zephyrian Empire, unexpected things are problems to be solved." "What about before you became queen?" Jake asked. "What were you like then?" Valeth's eyes took on a distant look. "I was a military commander. I led the expansion fleets that conquered new systems for the Empire. It was exciting, I suppose, dangerous. Each new world was a challenge, a puzzle to solve." "You miss it," Jake said. "It wasn't a question. Valeth paused. "Yes, I think I do miss it. But queens do not lead military campaigns. Queens maintain order and stability." "Says who?" Jake asked. Valeth stared at him. "Says tradition. Says the way things have always been done." "But you're the queen," Jake pointed out. "If you wanted to change tradition, who could stop you?" Valeth stood up and walked to the fountain. "You think very differently than my people do, Captain Morrison." "Please call me Jake," he said, joining her by the fountain. "And yes, humans probably do think differently. We're young and impatient, and we question everything. Even your own leaders." Jake laughed. "Especially our own leaders. We have this idea that people in power should have to explain their decisions. If they can't explain why something should be done a certain way, maybe it shouldn't be done that way." Valeth touched the surface of the light fountain, and ripples of color spread from her finger. "Commander Zalthek believes that questioning authority leads to chaos." "What do you believe?" Jake asked. Valeth was quiet for a long time. "I believe," she said finally, "that I have not been asked what I believe in a very long time." They walked deeper into the garden. Jake saw plants and creatures he had never imagined, all made of crystal and light but somehow alive. It was like being inside a living jewel. "Jake," Valeth said, "tell me about friendship." "Human friendship." Jake thought about how to explain it. "Friends are people who choose to care about each other. Not because they have to, not because of duty or position, but because they want to. Friends support each other and spend time together because they enjoy each other's company." "Choose to care," Valeth repeated. "That is not how relationships work in Zephyrian society. We have duties, obligations, roles to fulfill. Do you have any friends?" Jake asked gently. Valeth stopped walking. "I have advisors, subjects, military commanders. I have people who serve me and people who obey me. But friends who choose to care about me?" She shook her head. "I don't think such a thing exists in my world." "It could," Jake said. "If you wanted it to." They reached a clearing where crystal flowers grew in impossible colors. Valeth sat on the ground, something that Jake suspected she had never done in the throne room. Jake, what would happen if I changed things? If I tried to make the Empire less rigid, less controlled? Jake sat beside her. Some people would resist. Change is scary, but others might be relieved. They might have been waiting for someone to give them permission to be themselves. Commander Zalthek would say that such changes would lead to the collapse of our civilization. Maybe, Jake said. Or maybe your civilization would become something better, something that allows people to be individuals instead of just roles. Valeth plucked one of the crystal flowers and held it up to the light. Do you know what the strangest part of this conversation is? What? For the first time in 3,000 years, I feel like myself. Not Queen Valeth, the ruler, not the symbol of the Empire, just me. Jake smiled. That's the gift I wanted to give you. Valeth looked at him with those star-bright eyes. A gift? The gift of being seen as a person, Jake explained. The gift of having someone care about what you think and feel, not just what you decide or command. Valeth stared at the crystal flower in her hand. In all the species we have encountered, in all the trials we have conducted, no one has ever offered such a gift. Maybe that's because no one ever asked what you wanted instead of what the Empire needed, Jake suggested. Valeth was quiet for a very long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Jake, I think you have given me something I didn't even know I was missing. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light move through the crystal garden. Jake knew that this conversation was changing everything, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. But right now he was just enjoying the company of a new friend. What happens now? Valeth asked. Jake looked at her and smiled. Now we figure out how to build a better galaxy together. As friends. 3 days had passed since Jake's conversation with Queen Valeth in her crystal garden. Now he stood in the main conference room of the USS Horizon, watching as representatives from across the galaxy appeared on communication screens. Word of what had happened had spread faster than anyone expected. Queen Valeth had called for an emergency assembly of all species in the galactic community. For the first time in anyone's memory, she was questioning the trial system that had governed galactic civilization for 10,000 years. Captain, Dr. Lisa Bennett said, entering the conference room, we're receiving reports from 17 different star systems. Species that have been under Zephyrian guidance for centuries are asking questions they've never asked before. Jake nodded. What kind of questions? Questions about independence, about making their own choices, about whether the trial system is really necessary. Lisa paused. Jake, I think you started something much bigger than you realized. On the main screen, Queen Valeth appeared from her throne room, but everything about her seemed different. She wore simpler clothing, and instead of sitting formally on her throne, she stood in front of it. Commander Zalthek stood beside her, but his dark crystal form seemed agitated. Citizens of the galaxy, Queen Valeth began, I have called this assembly to discuss the future of our civilization. Jake could see dozens of different alien species on the communication screens. Some looked curious, others worried, and a few appeared angry. For 10,000 years, the Queen continued, we have used the trial system to determine which species deserve independence and which require guidance. This system has maintained order and peace across the galaxy. Commander Zalthek stepped forward. Your Majesty, the trials have been successful beyond measure. They have prevented wars, guided young species toward civilization, and maintained the stability that allows our society to flourish. But Queen Valeth raised her hand for silence. Commander Zalthek speaks the truth about the results of our system, but recently I've been forced to question whether our methods are the only way to achieve these goals. A voice came from one of the communication screens. Jake recognized it as belonging to a species called the Karathi, who had failed their trials 200 years ago. Your Majesty, the Karathi representative said, are you suggesting that the trial system might be changed? Queen Valeth looked directly into the camera. I am suggesting that perhaps it is time to consider whether there are better ways to help young species develop than through tests of military might and technological advancement. The reaction was immediate. Several species began talking at once, their voices overlapping in excitement and concern. Commander Zalthek's crystalline form seemed to grow darker. Your Majesty, Zalthek said urgently, the trials exist because they work. They separate species that are ready for independence from those that would cause chaos. Without them, the galaxy could descend into violence and disorder. Jake watched Queen Valeth carefully. He could see the conflict on her face as she struggled between thousands of years of tradition and the new ideas their conversation had awakened. "Commander," Queen Valeth said slowly, "what if there were other ways to achieve the same goals? What if instead of testing species through competition and potential failure, we helped them through cooperation and mutual support?" Another voice came from the screens, this one from a species Jake didn't recognize. "Your Majesty, with respect, cooperation requires trust. How can we trust species we don't know?" Queen Valeth smiled, and Jake was struck by how much more natural her expressions had become since their conversation. "That is an excellent question, and I believe the answer lies in something the humans have taught me." She turned to look directly at Jake through the screen. "Captain Morrison, would you please explain to the Assembly what you offered to humanity's place in galactic civilization?" Jake felt the attention of dozens of alien species focus on him. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we offered friendship," Jake said simply. "Not conquest, not submission, not even a trade agreement. We offered to get to know you as individuals and to let you get to know us the same way." "Friendship," repeated the Karathi representative. "You mean personal relationships between individuals?" "Exactly," Jake replied. "We believe that trust comes from understanding, and understanding comes from spending time together as equals." Commander Zaltek's voice cut through the discussion. "This is idealistic nonsense. Personal relationships cannot govern interstellar civilizations. Structure, hierarchy, and clear rules are what maintain order." But another voice joined the conversation, this one from a species that had passed their trials centuries ago and become full members of galactic society. "Commander Zaltek," the voice said, "perhaps the question is not whether personal relationships can govern civilizations, but whether civilizations should be governed in ways that allow personal relationships to flourish." Jake saw Queen Valeth's eyes widen slightly. The idea was spreading, and other species were beginning to embrace it. Over the next hour, Jake listened as representatives from across the galaxy debated ideas that had never been discussed before. Some species were enthusiastic about the possibility of change, others were cautious or frightened. A few, led by Commander Zalthik, argued that any change to the trial system would lead to disaster. Finally, Queen Valeth called for silence. "I have made a decision," she announced. "The trial system will be suspended immediately." The reaction was explosive. Dozens of voices erupted from the communication screens. Commander Zalthek stepped directly in front of Queen Valeth. "Your Majesty, you cannot do this. The trials are the foundation of our civilization." But Queen Valeth's voice carried the authority of her 3,000 years of rule. "Commander, I am the Queen. The trials were created to serve the needs of our civilization, not the other way around." She turned back to address the Assembly. "In place of the trials, I propose that we create a new system, a confederation of species based on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. Species will be invited to join not as subjects or even as junior partners, but as equals." Jake felt his heart racing. This was more than he had ever hoped for. "Your Majesty," came a voice from the screens. "What about species that are not ready for such responsibility? What about those that might use their freedom to harm others?" Queen Valeth considered this carefully. "We will offer support and guidance to any species that requests it. But we will also trust them to make their own choices and learn from their own mistakes. Growth comes from freedom, not from control." Commander Zalthek turned to face the Assembly screens. "This is madness. Your Majesty has been deceived by human sentiment. Structure and order have kept peace for 10,000 years. But Queen Valeth stepped beside her commander. "Zalthek, you speak of order and structure. But I ask you, what is the point of order if it prevents people from living as individuals? What is the value of structure if it makes every species exactly the same?" Jake watched as something historic happened. Across the galaxy, species that had been under Zephyrian control for centuries began to speak up. They talked about dreams they had abandoned, cultures they had been forced to change, and ideas they had never been allowed to explore. "Your Majesty," Jake said, "humanity would be honored to be the first species to join this new confederation. Not as subjects or protectorates, but as friends and equals." Queen Valeth smiled, and this time Jake could see genuine warmth in her crystal features. "Captain Morrison, humanity has already given us the greatest gift possible. You have shown us that there is more to civilization than order and control. You have shown us the value of seeing each other as individuals rather than as roles. Commander Zalthek made one final attempt. Your Majesty, please reconsider. The traditional ways have worked for millennia. Queen Valeth turned to her longtime commander with what looked like sadness. Zalthek, the traditional ways have maintained control and prevented chaos, but they have also prevented growth, creativity, and the kind of genuine connection between people that makes life worth living. She addressed the assembly once more. The Zephyrian Empire ends today. In its place, we will build something new together. A confederation where every species has a voice, where differences are celebrated rather than eliminated, and where friendship is valued more than submission. As the transmission ended and the various species began discussing this new future, Jake felt Dr. Lisa Bennett place a hand on his shoulder. "Captain," she said, "I think you just changed the galaxy." Jake looked out at the stars through the view screen. Somewhere among those lights were billions of people who would now have the chance to choose their own paths, to make their own mistakes, and to grow in their own ways. "No," Jake replied. "I think we all changed it together." Later that day, Queen Valeth sent a personal message to Jake. In it, she thanked him for the gift of friendship and announced that she would be stepping down from absolute rule to become the first elected president of the new Galactic Confederation. The message ended with a simple line that made Jake smile. "Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is treat someone as a friend." The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in 10,000 years, that was exactly what it needed.